So everybody, thanks so much for listening to Fire Breathing Rob. If you're listening to us for the first time on whatever platform, please like, subscribe, definitely share this interview. We have a very amazing guest on tonight. And if you think about this, this man went from a wrestler to a reverend, or and it's just really incredible, the whole story. So Dr. Chris Whaley, on the book out that he has just produced is The Masked Saint. We're going to be talking about that and other issues too. Dr. Chris Whaley, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to this interview.
Hey, Rob, I tell you what, I've been looking forward to this all week, man. And I appreciate you so much having me on.
Right, I'm looking forward to it too. There's a lot to talk about. Well, let's start off with this first. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about you?
Okay. I was the sickly child that you heard about, constantly in and out of the hospital when I was a little boy. In the 4th grade, I had polio, viral encephalitis. I was in the hospital for like 3 months. And, you know, when you're in the hospital that long, you get your days and your nights mixed up. And late at night, about the only thing on was professional wrestling. And that's what I watched, man. When I was a little boy, I just loved professional wrestling. I had a great doctor. He finally, they were able to find out what was causing my lack of an immune system. They got me fixed up, and this doctor, he's the one that got me going to the gym. He said, you need to get in the gym, you need to swim, you need to do all this stuff, and you need to start lifting weights. And I just became a gym rat. I mean, I loved it. And I really got into the weights, and I got into bodybuilding. And then when I met my wife when I was 16 years old, and we went to college together. We got married our senior year. We got out, and I was like 24 years old. My wife was teaching. She was a high school math teacher. And I was looking for a church to go to. And one day I'm looking at the Tampa Tribune, and it said, wanted professional wrestlers. And I was so excited. I jumped up and I went over to my wife and I showed it to her. And she was grading papers, and she just kind of rolled her eyes and went back to grading papers. And I said, hey, I'm going to do this. So I got a bag together, and I drove from where we lived over to Tampa. I walked into the gym. And here was this guy that I watched growing up, the great Malenko. And he was like the baddest of the bad. He was a bad guy. And he trained me to be a professional wrestler. I got to work with his sons. You might know his son's name, Dean Malenko. Dean
Right.
was the man of 1,000 holes. And Jody was his brother. And so I trained for 6 months, and I had my first match when I was 24 years old. I wrestled from the time I was, 1978 to 1988, and I got to wrestle some of the greats in the business.
So why did you start with the mask? Was there something behind that? Were you always wearing a mask at the beginning and then kind of changed toward the end? How did it go with all that?
Okay. Hey, by the way, I just saw Rey Mysterio, excuse me, last month in Vegas. They had the Cauliflower Alley Club, and he was one of the people that was honored at the Cauliflower Alley. So I got to see him a couple months ago. It was great to see him. Well, I was actually I got into wrestling, and then right after I got into wrestling, this church called me because I was looking to get some experience. And when you're 24 years old, nobody wants you as a pastor. So I had to be a youth pastor. And so I'm a youth pastor, and my wife was pregnant with our first child, and they didn't pay youth pastor. I was making $12,000 a year. My wife was pregnant, and in those days, they didn't pay you if you were pregnant. And so we were really hurting. And so I went to the pastor and I said, you know, I could wrestle a couple of nights a week and it would really help us financially. And this guy, he said, no, we're not going to turn this church into a circus. No way, no way. And so, you know, I was home that next Saturday. I'm watching wrestling. I'm watching my buddy wrestle, and he worked under a hood. That's what they called it. If you work with a mask, they called it working under a hood. Mm-hmm. And I said, that's it. I said, I can wear a mask and nobody will know who I am. And so I ordered my white trunks and my white boots, and I got a white mask, and I came up with the gimmick of the Saint. And so I started working a couple of nights a week as the Saint, and the church didn't know about it. Right. It was kind of funny because, you know, I get a little banged up and I'd go into the church and I'd have like a black eye or a broke nose or whatever. And they'd say, what happened to you? I said, well, I fell down. And I didn't lie. I did fall down, but I had a lot of help falling down. But I was a terrible youth minister. I wasn't there very long. And then I just got right back into wrestling. But I kept the mask and I wrestled as the Saint until I retired in 1988.
So what was the gimmick of the Saint? Was the case the gimmick that like you were very religious? Is that why you went with the Saint?
No, I was just a perennial good guy. You know, I was the good guy. I was the Saint, and you know, you're working against the bad guys, the heels, and so the perennial good guy is the Saint. And I just like that name. I like that gimmick, and you know, I had a cross on my cape, and so everybody knew who the Saint was.
I know. Sad to say, but if you were to wear that cross or do that gimmick right now, with the political correctness in the country, it probably wouldn't pan out, correct?
Yeah, probably wouldn't. But you know, I got rid of the cross on the cape. I just had a white cape. I had the white mask. I had the white tights, the white shorts, and I mean the white trunks and the white boots. And you know, I was just so liked by the crowd because I was the good guy. And, you know, if a bad guy dared do something to me, of course he got booed. So it was all in my favor in those days.
You talk to the viewers about some of these people that maybe you know, maybe you wrestled against them in general. I know you spoke about Rey Mysterio Jr.
Yeah. I had the pleasure of working against the Undertaker, Mark Calloway. Okay. So I worked against him. He was a great guy. Matter of fact, he was 23 years old when I worked against him. And, you know, he's like 6'8", 315 pounds. And I'm 5'10", and I was like 225. So it was kind of scary. Matter of fact, the night that I wrestled the Undertaker was a Friday night in Dallas. And when I wrestled on Friday nights, I always took my wife and my little girls with me. And after the match, we would go out and do something called Friday Night Fun Night. We would have a good time. And this particular night, I went ahead, I wrestled my match, and I'm back in the dressing room. I'm taking my boots off, and a promoter came in and said, hey, whoever was going to work against Mark didn't show up. He said, I need somebody to work twice. And I raised my hand. I said, hey, I'll do it, because I knew that Mark was going to be a big star one day. I knew that. And I said, I'll do it. So I had to get the referee. I said, hey, go out, find my wife and girls, tell them that I'm going to wrestle again. Tell them not to meet me in the parking lot. And so the referee went out, he found them, came back. He said, yeah, I found them. They're waiting. I said, you didn't tell them who I'm working against, did you? And he said, no, I didn't. I said, okay. So the time for the match came. I got in the ring, and I'm trying to find my girls, and I found them. And then the lights went down, that hideous music came on, and Mark walked in. And when he did, I'm looking, and both my little girls started crying when they saw him. And then my wife, her eyes got really big, and then she grabbed her purse and started going through her purse. And so we had the match. It was a great match. You know, we went about 20 minutes, and just a great match. That night, after it's over, we're on our way back to Fort Worth. I look in the rearview mirror. Both my little girls are asleep, and I looked over at my wife and I said, hey, babe, right before that match, I noticed you grabbed your purse. You were going through it like crazy. What in the world was up with that? And she thought for a moment. She said, oh, I was looking for the checkbook to make sure you'd paid the insurance. So that was it. You know, I worked against the Ultimate Warrior. I worked against the Freebirds. I worked against Roddy Piper. Matter of fact, Roddy Piper is in the movie that is based on my book too. He plays the promoter. And so it was great that I hadn't seen him like in 25 years. And when the movie was made, The Masked Saint, he plays the promoter, and I got to see him. And he was just super, super guy. He loved his family. If you ever YouTube any of his matches, you'll see that his wedding ring is on. He never took his wedding ring off. He even worked with it on, and he just loved his family, and just a super, super guy. I don't have any bad stories. I worked against Bruiser Brody. I got one of my last concussions from Bruiser Brody, but he was kind of a rough guy, and I wouldn't want to get back in the ring with him. But God rest his soul, he's already gone.
Yeah. Can you talk about that? You just spoke about concussions, so that kind of leads me into this topic. We heard about guys like Chris Benoit, who was a good wrestler. He was in that. I'm sure he was friends with Dean Malenko. They worked together a lot. And obviously the tragedy that went through him with all these concussions and killing his family. I mean, it's really a tragedy. We hear about all these football players and their concussions, and Junior Seau, guy that I remember, he killed himself. So what is wrestling a lot safer now, I guess I should ask, compared to when you were wrestling, or is it the same?
No, I had over 100 concussions while I was wrestling. Somebody said, "What's it like to be in a professional wrestling match?" And I said, "It's the equivalent of being in a car wreck every time you get in the ring." I had some pretty rough matches. I haven't been in the business since 1988, but some of the things that I've seen, especially with Mick Foley, that guy, some of the bumps that he took, I'm awestruck by Mick Foley. But I think it's just as rough today because everybody wants to one up somebody, and some of the things that they're doing now and some of the bumps that they're taking, I wouldn't want to do that. So I think it's, I think it's probably rougher today than it was in my day. Really?
Wow. Steroids was a huge thing.
Right.
And obviously there wasn't really testing. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I was told that there's not a lot of testing. Now there's a little bit more testing as far as that goes. I'm not sure if that's fully correct, but so can you talk about that? Did you know a lot of these guys were juicing? And when you're going up against some of these guys and they're juicing and you're not, it's going to scare the death out of you.
Yeah. I had a promoter tell me, this is a promoter, he said, "Blow your body up, I'll make a star out of you." And, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I just knew way back then, I knew, if this stuff is affecting your muscles, your heart is a muscle. And I just didn't want anything to do with it, but it was very rampant. I mean, I saw guys juicing in the dressing room and in the bathroom. Saw a guy standing at the urinal one time, and a guy walks up, flips him on the butt with a shot. So I just didn't want anything to do with that because, life is too precious to do anything to take away from that. I know when I look at somebody, you can just say, "Hey, that's not normal." Right. It takes help to look like that, and so I don't know what testing they're doing today because I haven't been in the business, but I think that there's ways around what they're, if they are testing whatever they're doing, but I think it's still pretty rampant.
And for people that are just tuning in, this is Dr. Chris Whaley. Again, The Masked Saint. Definitely look out for it. It's in bookstores right now. We're going to go into that a little bit more. I do want to go into this question. What made you go in from being a wrestler? And I know you did say that you dabbled into, a youth minister, but a full-blown on minister after wrestling.
Well, wrestling was my dream. Growing up as a sickly kid and not being able to participate in sports when I was a young child. And then to be able to fulfill my dream of being in the ring, that was great. The ministry is my calling. I mean, I knew that I was called to be a pastor. And what was so great is my last 3 years, Rob, in wrestling, I was getting a seminary degree at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. And so I'm going to school in the daytime and I'm wrestling at night, which was, awesome. So I knew from the time that I left in 1985 to go to Fort Worth, Texas to get my Master of Divinity, I knew I was going to be a pastor probably within 3 years. And so I felt the calling of God in my life a long time ago that I was going to be a pastor. But the wrestling was my dream. The ministry is my calling. And that's what I've done for the last 30 years.
How do you feel about that there are a lot of these phony balonies like that are in your field as far as pastors? And I feel like that's why a lot of millennials are really going away from this, where they should be coming toward, because Christ made us. That's who we get our meaning in life, is to follow the Bible and follow Christ's teachings.
Well, Rob, I agree with you. My brother-in-law was the son of a Baptist minister, but I never met anyone who hated the church as much as he did. So I, accepted that call to be a pastor. My wife was pregnant with our first child, and I asked him to go to lunch with me. And I said, when we sat down for lunch, I said, I just want to know why you hate the church so badly, because I'm going to be a pastor, and I don't want my kids growing up hating the church, and I don't want my family hating the church. So tell me what happened. And he said, my dad, he loved that church more than he loved me and my brothers and my sister. And he was one way at church. He was a different way at home. And I was making a mental note of everything he said, because I didn't want that in my family. So I have 2 girls that I love. I can't tell you how much I love them. And they're both married and they both have kids.
Sure.
And when they were little girls, we used to have a devotion every evening with my family. And I didn't want to be a hypocrite. And I told my girls, I said, listen, Daddy's preaching on this Sunday. And I said, if there's anybody that needs it, it is me, because I fall so short. And when I made mistakes, I told my girls that I made mistakes, because I wanted them to see the real me. I didn't live one way at church and live a different way at home. Right. But I understand what millennials are seeing, because they're seeing a lot of hypocrisy. Agreed. And even with their own folks, it's like, you take me to church and you live this way at home, and you go to church, I don't even recognize you. So they're seeing the inconsistencies, they're seeing the hypocrisy, and there's no one that hates what you were talking about with these prosperity gospel people on TV who are every other word is give. When I was in Texas, there was a guy, I'm trying to think of what his name, Robert Tilton. Yeah, Robert Tilton was this guy in Texas. And he's one of those, send me all this money and all. And somebody did an article on him. There was a young couple went to his church and said, hey, listen, we're having a hard time. We lost our jobs. We need some help and all. They kicked him out of the church. They said, you obviously got sin in your life. Well, this reporter started doing some investigative journalism on him. This guy's taking in $80 million a year. And thankfully they brought him down. People like the guy in Louisiana, I can't even remember what his name was, that he fell, and Jim Baker and Tammy Baker and all of that. If it breaks anybody's heart, it breaks pastors like me. It breaks my heart to see that, because the average pastor in America is very underpaid. Matter of fact, the majority of pastors are bivocational. They work a full-time job and then they pastor part-time. And so, my heart goes out to millennials, because not everybody is like that. Right. And I guarantee you, if you look in your community, you can find the real deal. And, you can find the real deal and not have to deal with the hypocrites. there's hypocrites in everything, Rob.
Right.
You know, I know a guy that owns a grocery store. He's one of the biggest hypocrites I've ever seen, but people still gotta eat. You gotta get groceries, right? I know a guy that owns a gas station, and he's a big hypocrite, but I still got to put gas in my car. And I had a little lady who's in my book, that told me a long time ago. She said, you know, there's hypocrites in everything. And if you hide behind a hypocrite, then you're smaller than the hypocrite. Whatever it is that keeps you from doing something, you're hiding behind that. And I even have a chapter in my book called The Hypocrite, because it was about the hypocrite in my church. And Rob, another thing that millennials will love, you know, in my book, the reason it's called The Masked Saint is because when I went to my first church, I handled some things differently than a pastor would handle. I handled them more as a professional wrestler than I did as a pastor. I had a guy that was beating his wife. That's how the Masked Saint started. This guy was beating his wife. His wife came. I saw two black eyes. I went to his house. I called him outside. I said, you know, I came over to see how you would do against somebody who was able to fight back, because you're a bully, and bullies only pick on people that they know they can dominate. I said, I'm here. Give it your best shot. And I had the pleasure of kicking his rear end all over his front yard. So that was how the Masked Saint started. And then I had, you know, that hypocrite that I told you about in my church. I knocked him on his rear end. I had to stand before the church and apologize for hitting a church member. And it was on that day that I did that. The church stood and gave me a standing ovation. And I told my wife going home, I said, you know, what other pastor in the state of Florida could knock a member of his church on his rear end and get a standing ovation? But I did, you know. I just had incident after incident where, you know, I handled things more as a professional wrestler than I did as a pastor. And that's what makes the Masked Saint so neat for millennials. They would love that.
Yeah, can we go into the movie and also the book, and why they were produced? I mean, we've kind of talked a little bit in bits and pieces about this throughout the whole interview, but can you talk about both of those in specific?
Absolutely. Yeah, I had this idea. I had so many of these things happen, and I was telling my wife, I said, you know, nobody's putting anything really good on TV since Michael Landon died. You know, Michael Landon was my hero. He put Little House on the Prairie, which I still love. And, you know, because it just every episode was just great. It was good moral stuff. And then he did Highway to Heaven. And it was just good moral stuff. I said, nobody's doing that anymore. I said, you know, I said, this has the possibilities of being a great TV series. And my wife said, well, you got to write a book. And I'd never written a book. And so I sat down one Saturday, I got on the computer and I wrote out the first chapter. I showed it to her and she said, keep going. And so each chapter is actually something that happened to me. That's why it was so easy to write. Each chapter is something that happened in my life. And then when I got through with the book and I published the book, then I had these movie producers that came to me and said, you know, we want to talk to you about making it into a movie. And lo and behold, you know, in 2013, in February of 2013, I got this call from a producer and he said, hey, we're going to make your book into a movie. And, you know, in 2013, they filmed the movie. It didn't come out until January of 2016, but, you know, they loved it too. So the book made a great movie.
So what do you hope people get out of the book and the movie?
Have you ever failed, Rob?
Many times.
Okay. You're looking at a guy who's failed many times. I have failed so many times.
Fail every day.
Yeah. But the Masked Saint is about a second chance. I was afforded a second chance. Right. And God is the God of a second chance. And that's what that book is about. There's a great passage, and I'm not getting religious on you, Rob, if you don't mind me mentioning this, but
no,
there's a book in the Bible called Jeremiah, and chapter 18. It's about, he tells the prophet Jeremiah to go to the potter. He wanted to teach him a great lesson. So he goes to the potter and he's watching the potter work with the clay. And when he got through with the vessel, it had a lot of flaws in it.
Sure.
And so the potter took the piece of clay and he squished it back together, and he put that same piece of clay back on the wheel, and he made the same piece of clay with all the flaws in it into a new vessel. And then God said to Jeremiah, cannot I do with you as the potter is done with the clay? Or as the clay is in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand. So that was me. When I got through with my life, Rob, I had just totally screwed it up. You know, I mean, I'm in my freshman year of college. I have just really made a lot of dumb mistakes and dumb decisions. And God was able to take me with all my flaws, put me back on the wheel, and make me into a new vessel. And that's the story of the masked saint. That is, if you've messed your life up, you know, give it to God, let him put you back on the wheel and make you into a new vessel, because God is the God of a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth chance, you know, and more. God gives me chances all the time.
I hope people, again, go and get the book, The Masked Saint. I hope people also check out the movie. Where can they find more about you, Chris, and learn more about the book, get the book, see the movie in general?
You know, the movie came out in January 2016. It was in about 1,000 theaters. And then in June of 2016, it went on Netflix, and it was on Netflix for 3 years. It had a 3-year run, and now it's off. If you want to see it for free, if you have the Tubi app, Tubi, you know, the movie is on Tubi. You can read about me. All you got to do is Google my name, Chris Whaley, Whaley, and then put Rustler beside it. So, or you can Google the Masked Saint. You can read all kinds of stuff about me or whatever. You can go on my Facebook, Chris Whaley on Facebook, and anybody, you know, here it is. 4 years, 5 years later, there's not a week goes by, Rob, that I don't get messages on Facebook from people all over the world who have seen The Masked Saint or who have read the book. I answer everyone who contacts me. I answer everyone. So I love having conversations with people, and there's no question that is out of bounds for me. I'll do my best to get you an honest answer. And Rob, I can't thank you enough, buddy. You are just absolutely great. And I hope your show just continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And you do a great job, man.
All right, Chris, hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Again, Dr. Chris Whaley, definitely check it out, The Masked Saint. It's a book, it's a movie, whichever you prefer, definitely check it out. I think it's worth the read and also worth the watch. So, Chris, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man. God bless you.